Hello and welcome back to another Monster Monday, a series where I draw a creature from D&D and I talk about its lore and its history and what it's like to fight in game as well. As always, these videos are made on your suggestions for monsters that you'd like to see me draw and discuss that you leave down in the comment section below. And today is no different. Today's video is a suggestion from my good friend Crafty over at the Crafty Tabletop YouTube channel, and he suggested to see the Gith. A very, very popular suggestion. A lot of people have requested to see me draw the Gith and talk about the Gith. However, that's an awful lot of stuff to cover. The Gith are two species, and there's a huge amount of ground, there's a huge amount of history and lore that needs to be discussed if I'm going to cover the Gith. It's like saying elves rather than dark elves and wood elves and all that kind of stuff. So what I thought I would do is my first ever two-parter for a Monster Monday. I'm going to talk about the Gith in general, but also I think I'm going to focus more on the Githyanki today, and next week I'll talk more about the Githzerai, and those are the two main species of the Gith. But either way, I'm getting ahead of myself here, so let's get started with today's video. So what are the Gith? Well, that's actually kind of confusing. No one totally knows. Vaguely though, they are psionic humanoids who resemble a sort of green or yellow-skinned kind of elven humanoid with pointed ears, and they're usually either depicted with a kind of bat-like nose or just nostrils descending where a nose would be. They tend to have tufts of hair in the places that humans might, and as I say, they're split into two distinct species, the Githzerai and the Githyanki. The Githyanki were the first of the two species to be introduced into D&D in 1979 through issue number 12 of White Dwarf magazine, and the name is apparently taken from a book by none other than George R.R. Martin, which was written in 1977, called The Dying Light. The writers of White Dwarf were fascinated by this story, wherein the Githyanki were apparently slaves to an alien species called the Harangans. In this story, the Githyanki are used as slaves and to fight wars on the behalf of the Harangans against the humans. They were incredibly potent psychics, although they were barely sapient. They weren't very intelligent creatures at all. And there's an awful lot of parallels there to the Githyanki in D&D, but the intelligence thing definitely isn't the case. These creatures are usually of human intelligence or above, although their story is largely the same. You see, the Gith were imprisoned by the Illithids, by the Mind Flayers, and I touched on this a little bit already in my Mind Flayer Monster Monday, perhaps you'll remember. But the Gith actually arose as a result of their enslavement to the Mind Flayers. They were some kind of species beforehand, and a lot of wikis and journals online seem to suggest that potentially the Gith might have been humans before they turned into the Gith, although the way that they are illustrated in the monster manual with their kind of swirling arched patterns in their armor and their pointed ears, I wonder if perhaps they may have been elves or maybe even half-elves. Perhaps the Illithids simply enslaved a number of races and their resulting progeny was when it ended up being the Gith. Maybe their yellowish green skin was the result of half-orcs and half-elves and so on and so forth being kept in captivity for use in the Illithid armies or in servitude to the Illithids in other ways, and eventually over the generations they ended up becoming the Gith. Either way, whatever they were is not fully decided yet in current day D&D lore, but it is also believed that the Illithids intended them to become whatever they are. They're strong, resourceful, survivable, dexterous, and very versatile slaves. And apparently they became these creatures as a result of selective breeding on the behalf of the Illithids. I suppose what they didn't intend for was that being in such close proximity to the Illithids for so many hundreds or perhaps thousands of years, the Gith ended up becoming psychically sensitive, so much so that the Githyanki infuse their psychic energy into their weapons, into their armor, and all are innately born with a telekinetic sensitivity, allowing them to cast Mage Hand, which is invisible, cast Jump, Misty Step, sometimes even Plane Shift or Telekinesis, depending on the level of the creature that you're fighting, or if you choose to play as these creatures, because they became playable in Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, you also gain those same psionic benefits. Either way, developing their psionic might, perhaps in secret, while enslaved to the Illithids, eventually a savior among the Githyanki arose. Her name was Gith, which sounds a tiny bit derivative until you think about these creatures didn't have a name before Gith arose. She was a resourceful and powerful fighter who trained her people to embrace their skills and eventually, one day, revolt. Following the example of Gith and her plans to overthrow the Illithid Empire, the Gith people were saved and did their best to damage the Illithid Empire as much as possible, leaving it in ruin, decimating the Illithid numbers, and leaving them scampering towards the edges of the universe. But after the warring was done and the people saved, liberated by Gith, these now freed psionic slaves didn't totally know what to do with themselves. They were a people divided. Roughly half of the people were devoted utterly to Gith, revering her as some sort of demigod, and chose instead to name themselves the Githyanki, which in their language means followers of Gith. Under her tutelage, they realized that war was not yet done. The Illithid still lived, even though they were scampering away and fleeing with their tails between their legs. The Githyanki became dominated by a certain set of principles, the predominating feature of which was that only the strong survive. The Githyanki liberated themselves by their own strength. By suffering, they grew in power and thus deserved their freedom, and they believed that all other species should have this opportunity to grow in strength as a result of strife. On the other end of the scale, another revered slave, an elder called Zerthimon, preached that freedom was a gift indeed that they had earned, but that stooping low to the levels of the Illithids to cause suffering to other creatures to cause them to grow was inherently wrong, and that instead, to avoid enslavement again, to avoid strife, the Gith needed to segregate themselves away, to dwell on their own strength, essentially to hide, but to relish their sense of community and to grow together in the event that other species may also be hostile. These two polarizing views became all-consuming among the Gith, very much in the same way that today's political climate seems to be not so much a Venn diagram of ideas, but utterly segregational. People only listening to their own points of view until those points of view get louder and more distorted and more corrupted, until the Githyanki became a warring horde of barbarian, militant, almost ruthless conquerors, and those that followed Zerthimon, who later called themselves the Githzerai, who we'll cover in next week's video, became pacifist monks who sequestered themselves away in other dimensions. Into this downward spiral of strength and galactic improvement by means of war, the Githyanki used their incredible intellect and the spacefaring and dimensional travelling technology that they had acquired or learned from the Illithids to become a spacefaring civilization that travelled between dimensions. They built great city ships that travelled to the astral plane, wherein time flowed differently, and they could train in private to become stronger and stronger. The average Gith lifespan is only about 100 years. However, in the astral plane, they could live for almost twice as long, dedicating their entire lives to the art of war, leaving only when they found vulnerable targets in other planes of existence to then raid and ravage, harvesting their supplies, slaughtering their people, but leaving a few of their enemies alive, even giving them rations, weapons, and supplies. Baffled, these interdimensional settlements grow to hate the Githyanki. They survive on the rations provided. They train with the weapons they're given. They grow in numbers. They grow in strength. They grow in hate, just as the Githyanki did when they were enslaved. And with time functioning differently on things like the material plane, those Githyanki that raided them perhaps decades prior return unaged and ready for another battle once a new, stronger settlement has grown. Filled with blood-curdling rage against the Gith, they fight them over and over again, growing stronger and filled with more hate each time. But this is the plan of the Githyanki, because if they fight stronger enemies, they themselves will become stronger. They seek to continuously challenge themselves to fight stronger and stronger adversaries until eventually they have amassed such power that they never need feel the fear of the Illithid Empire again. Now, the Githyanki have some pretty terrifying weapons in their arsenal. You can see me drawing this as quite a sci-fi looking creature, and that's definitely inspired by the fact that they are spacefaring. Just like the Elithids, they are interdimensional or spacefaring creatures who literally have spaceships and all that kind of stuff. All I could think of when I was drawing these things is that, although I didn't use much influence from it, these creatures sound like Jedi, or I suppose Sith in the case of the Githyanki. These things are evil in alignment and are culturally obsessed with growing in their own strength and stamping out any weakness in their own society. Although there are admirable sounding traits about their philosophy, the requirement for all societies to grow stronger to defend themselves, they are undeniably evil. Their leader currently is actually a Lich, a woman called Valkeith, who sits atop a throne of skulls in the central floating city of the Githyanki, locked away in the astral plane. There, those Gith that show incredible promise and prowess take part in a ritual that they believe venerates them and empowers them, perhaps teleports them to a different dimension whereby they will fight the strongest enemy of all to defend the people of the Githyanki. But funnily enough, none of these people are ever seen or heard from again. Their battle is obviously eternal, think the Githyanki. But in reality, those of us who have watched the Lich Monster Monday know precisely what is happening. These people go to their queen's chamber. One is picked every generation, and their soul is imprisoned within the phylactery of the Lich to maintain her long life. But why would they follow something so undeniably evil? Well, it certainly helps that she's incredibly powerful and thus very strong, a daunting leader, but she's also a key ally of Gith, the woman that they believe to be their saviour, up until her death. And Valkeith maintains the promise that Gith once believed in. She venerates Gith, builds statues and monuments, keeps this legend alive almost like a religion, keeping her people unified. But she's also responsible for the greatest pact and one of the most potent skills and allies that the Githyanki have in their army. Valkeith, at a pivotal time in the war against the Elithids, being an undead creature, decided to breach the planes of reality and contact one of the most evil creatures conceivably known, Tiamat, the Queen of Dragons. She alone travelled through dimensions to meet this horrendous creature. No one knows what happens in that meeting. There's no record of what bargain was struck, what foul pact was met. But when she returned, she came with a flight of red dragons, which are the mounts of the Githyanki. That's right, these already horrifyingly powerful, armoured Sith raiders essentially fly through dimensions on the backs of huge dragons. I imagine to the medieval societies of most D&D campaign settings, having a rift in dimensions open up above your village, a legion of pretty enormous red dragons flying out of a hole in space and time, burning your city to the ground, only for horrifyingly potent, overpowered, humanoid alien creatures to jump off their backs and slaughter your entire cities. Must be just about one of the most frightening things you could conceivably remember, but it would definitely stick in your mind, again, as is the plan of the Githyanki. Now, following the whole Sith route here, these guys do actually wield lightsabers. Alright, so they're not called lightsabers, but they're called silver swords, and they do the same sort of thing. Githyanki craft these amazing swords out of silver, and I'm not using silver in my drawing, I'm using a kind of psionic energy, but you can represent them however you like. They're called silver swords in the monster manual and in the official lore, but they seem very sci-fi, so anywho. These great swords are +3 magic weapons because they are conduits to the psychic energy of the Gith. They focus their minds through the blade, causing an edge that is so sharp that it can cut through a thought. And on the astral plane, if someone were to wander through and meet the Gith, this is so sharp that it can cut the tether that ties you back to your own body. These horrendous weapons do both psychic and slashing damage. In the case of the Githyanki Knight, for example, a challenge 8 creature, this weapon becomes a terrifying +9 to hit. It deals 2d6 +6 slashing damage and an additional 3d6 psychic damage, which sounds like a good template for a lightsaber to me if you want to put those in your game. However, be very wary of taking a silver sword away from a Githyanki, or even taking one from its corpse, because they venerate these items as sacred artifacts. It's not unknown that an entire Githyanki detachment will seek anyone who claims one of these swords and is not Gith themselves. they'll pull themselves out of the reality that they've travelled to hunt this thief down for the desecration of using a silver sword, and will always prioritise them in combat if they see one. So when I was drawing these things, I wanted to have something that looked kind of violent and threatening, and I knew they were humanoid, and I knew they kind of had to have greeny yellow skin, but otherwise I didn't have too much to go on. They usually have kind of elf ears, which, I'll be honest, that kind of bothers me. Just another pointy-eared race. So I thought I'd have a bit of fun with it and think, if humans were to adapt over time to be living in space in the darkness with these weird squid people, what might happen to them? Well, there are a few theories about where we might evolve in the future. One major concept is the idea of a mono-ethnicity, which I suppose we kind of see in the Gith. They seem to have a single appearance. And again, if the Illithids enslaved numerous species, perhaps their skin colour and their appearance is as a result of numerous members of these different species merging. They're said to have black eyes, which I thought was very important because these creatures are going to be surviving in the dark and in space, so their eyes are going to need to be able to absorb as much light as possible in order to distinguish things. But interestingly, they don't have dark vision. Now that might be one of the reasons why they became so psychically sensitive, because if they never adapted to be able to see in the dark, they would be able to need to see in other ways. However, I thought that maybe evolution would have done a bit of a job and would have adapted their eyes to look more sort of dark, take in more light anyway. So I gave them these kind of black shimmering eyes, and eventually I gave them irises as well so they could contract based on how much light was coming in. One current theory is that eventually we might do away with teeth and instead have something more akin to a beak like that inside a pufferfish, because individual teeth can fall out, but having one solid piece of chewing material might do better. I don't know what diet the Gith were kept on while they were enslaved. Perhaps they were fed the same thing over and over again, and as a result, I imagine that their teeth probably would merge into this single beak, so I have just one, almost like a gum shield of bone as their teeth there. And also, I thought we should probably get rid of one of their fingers, and although I don't show their feet in this, I kind of imagine that they would have either no toes and perhaps almost like talon-like feet, or just fewer toes. That's supposed to be something that's likely to happen in the next few hundred years, just like dogs and cats who have an extra digit that they're not really using. Our pinky toes are apparently likely to be the next things that are going to drop off the ends of our bodies in evolutionary terms, as they don't really serve a function. So I thought Gith could have one fewer finger than we have. As for the hair, I felt that the Gith had just had a really hard life and they deserved to have really fabulous hair, so I thought I'd put some starlight in their hair, give them a nice solid gradient. And the appearance there, I thought, well, these creatures are quite military and warlike, and that reminded me a lot of the first alien species that I ever encountered in comic books, which were the Shi'ar in the X-Men series, which are creatures which are loved to be hated among Marvel fans, but they had some pretty nifty hair, and it definitely stood out as different from humans and elves. There you go, guys, have some nice hair. Otherwise, in terms of their dress, I really wanted something that looked sufficiently sci-fi. This is a good way, having Gith in your universe is a good way to introduce magitech and sci-fi kind of elements to a medieval world without kind of breaking it. Obviously, this may not be everybody's cup of tea, and the majority of Gith drawings that I've seen have planted them firmly in the fantasy setting by dressing them essentially as you would drow. They have, very similar armor and weapons and color schemes and all this kind of stuff to the drow, but I wanted to do something different, and spacefaring psychic Jedi and Sith creatures screamed to me, this is a sci-fi thing I'm dealing with. So while trying to entrench it in sort of classical armor, I thought I would add a sci-fi twist. But the other thing that really inspired me was Spartan Society and a Spartan way of dressing, because these creatures are as close to Spartan legends and myths and history as anything that I've read in D&D so far. The Githyanki, like the Spartans, sequestered themselves away with large barriers and small, close-knit clusters of training camp-like towns. Now, admittedly, the Spartans did this in Greece, and the Githyanki went to a whole other dimension to make sure that they weren't being spied on with their specialist training methods, but the concept was still the same. They didn't want anyone to know how they were training. Floating in their massive civilizations, their citadels in the astral plane, the Githyanki have Spartan-like war schools. In ancient Sparta, these schools were called the Agog, and those children that reached age to join were sent in packs like wolves called the Agalai. These kids were given very little food or clothing, encouraging them to steal to survive. They were dealt out incredibly harsh punishments if they were caught stealing to survive, but not for the act of stealing itself, but for not having the cunning enough to get away with their crime. There's a tremendously famous story written by Plutarch, wherein a Spartan child who steals a fox to eat from a local townsman is confronted by a guard, and he stuffs the fox into his shirt, pretending that he's just, overweight or something. While being interrogated by this guard, this Spartan child desperately holds onto the fox in his shirt, which ravenously tears away at his innards to escape out the other side. The Spartan child never makes so much as a whimper before collapsing on the ground dead, for fear of admitting his fault, which is an incredibly harsh way of raising a child. But the Spartans, and I imagine the Githyanki, with their similar moral compass, follow roughly the same guidelines. Spartan children had a tough life from the get-go. Children that were deemed to be weak or malformed were often left on Mount Taygetus to die. Sometimes Spartan children were faced with a test, like a final year exam, to go out into the wilderness and survive in the harsh of winter, in the blistering heat of summer, given no supplies or weapons, only left to fend for themselves, only then being allowed to return to society as an adult. The Githyanki have a very similar set of tests, essentially. Githyanki that are to come of age are sent into the material plane to hunt their own illithid, may only return to the astral plane to be with their family after they have slain an illithid by themselves and return with its head, which might be a fantastic way of playing a Githyanki, because we know in Modern Canaan's Tome of Foes you can play these creatures. It's very hard to justify or reason why a Githyanki would split from its raiding party alone unless it had just come of age. It finds itself in the material plane, left to its own devices to slay an illithid, but it realizes that maybe it's a little bit weak, probably can't do it just yet. So much to its shame, it puts off this act, eventually finding a band of adventurers to grow in strength with, until one day it feels that it can accomplish its mission either with these adventurers or alone and be allowed to return home. Following their training in the Agog, Spartan children were expected to join the military. If they did so, they would be in the military, they would serve, that was their only function, till the age of 60. However, they could choose to reject military service in favour of being allowed to live, but they were deemed cowards and were granted lesser citizenship than those that served in the army. This could potentially be another reason why a Githyanki would leave the astral plane. Fed up of being mocked, not choosing a life of violence, they leave, or perhaps are even booted out of the astral plane to live amongst humans and elves and other species that they deem to be lesser. But the important thing here is that the Spartans didn't have a really terrible time. They obviously had very harsh punishments and very, very harsh rituals and an education system, but their education was actually fantastic. Unlike most of the other Greco-Roman era societies, all children that entered the Agog were trained to be literate, not necessarily so that they could become philosophers or scholars in their own right, but at the very least so that they could read military maps and follow orders written down on parchment. Another similarity to the Spartans is perhaps their almost worship of Gith as this mythological figure. We know that in Sparta, Leonidas, the king that we see in the 300 series, actually ended up having a cult based around him in ancient Sparta after that, all the way up until the 2nd century, bearing in mind that Leonidas died in 480 BC. And so this idea of venerating this one hero as your cultural icon and living their life as an example seems to be very, very similar. And I think it's a good way to kind of base the personality of the Gith. We know apparently that Leonidas's power once came under question by his fellow Spartans, who said, "Except for being king, you are not superior to us." To which Leonidas replied, "Were I not better than you, I should not be king." Leonidas believed that he was put in his position because he had earned it, because he was the mightiest Spartan, and were he not, he wouldn't deserve the throne. And the same should be said for the Githyanki. To get into the mindset of role-playing one of these characters, you should feel that you are appointed by your position. You're appointed to your position because you have earned it, because you are the mightiest Githyanki that you can be. There may be superiors to you, but those inferior know their place because they have not earned the right to challenge you. They have not beaten you in combat and therefore do not deserve your belongings, do not deserve your title. So this idea of honor and tradition, of training, of education, but also about the savagery of life, the requirement for societies to become strong, to become brutal in order to survive as the Githyanki did, is reflected when you roll one of these characters up. They're lawful evil, as they definitely should be. They believe in the structure and rigid command of the military, while also raiding other towns and settlements. They're not there to defend other creatures, they're there to force them to become strong under their own right, and in turn to grow the strength of the Githyanki. And these versatile soldiers are well educated. They don't live as savages. You learn a rule called Decadent Mastery, allowing you to learn an extra language of your choice, a proficiency in one skill or tool of your choice, and a mastery with a collection of weapons for a well-rounded education. In their lifetime, a Githyanki will start as a warrior, challenge rating 3, creature with a great sword. Perhaps they're still training, they're learning to use a silver sword. They wear half plate, granting them 17 AC. With their incredible dexterity and speed, they have a 14 dex and 15 strength. They'll blend their martial prowess with psionic abilities to be a devastating force in combat at low levels. Hopefully, once their training is complete, they will become a Githyanki knight, a wielder of this silver greatsword. And they will master even more psionic abilities, including plane shift and telekinesis. And after their training as a Githyanki knight is complete, they tend to go on to one of two different directions. Either they will become a Kithrak, a master strategist, an elder among the Gith, a challenge rating 12 creature with an ability to parry incoming attacks, such as their knowledge and time spent in the field of war, but also a psionic ability to rally charmed or frightened members of their own crew, of their own warband, causing them to end such conditions if they can see a creature that is suffering from one of these conditions. Alternatively, they might become what's known as a Gish, which is one who harnesses psionic energy to such an extent that they become more like a spellcaster, weaving the fabric of reality, altering the structure of the planes that they visit to cause dimension doors to open, to spontaneously combust the air into a fireball with just their minds, to alter time around their allies with a haste spell. But to do so requires them so much focus that they must give up their silver greatswords and instead use a one-handed longsword. Either way, Githyanki are fantastic creatures, and I hope that I've done them justice with my illustration here. There's so much more Gith stuff that I want to cover in a Monster Monday, so I hope you will join me next week where I talk about the Githzerai, the other half of the Gith people, much less violent but still equally sci-fi psionic people, the other half of their story. As always, if you enjoyed this video, please make sure to leave it a little thumbs up, a little like, perhaps favourite this video and share it with an avid Gith fanatic that you know, or someone who's really eager to play or fight the Gith. Everything that you can do like that really does help the channel, so thank you very much for those of you who do that. If you enjoyed this drawing and you'd like a copy of it for yourself, I give those away to my patrons over on Patreon, and depending on how you would like to support me there, you either get a digital or a physical version of all the monsters that I draw of a month. So if you'd like to support me in a more personal way, then I'd like to direct you over to my Patreon page. Otherwise, guys, if you can resist the opportunity to wield a psychic silver lightsaber, then try not to steal them, otherwise you might have a flight of red dragon riders with terrifying psychic abilities hunting you down. So weigh out those options, and happy monster hunting.